Back on Big Ten today, and the guys were alluding to this just a few minutes ago, how balanced Michigan State is, all the different ways they can beat you. One of just 6 teams nationally averaging at least 250 pass yards and 200 rushing yards. 3 of the 6, as you can see, are from the Big Ten, Ohio State and Nebraska on that list as well. Colton Pouncy covers the Spartans for The Athletic. He is kind enough to give us a few minutes of his time as we continue to preview this huge showdown tomorrow. And Colton, let's start here. Just give us a sense of the vibe around Michigan State this week.
Oh, man. I've been on this beat since 2018, and I don't recall anything like this. The buzz that we're seeing around campus, and it's kind of been leading up, not even just this week, just kind of way before then. Like, my Twitter mentions have been, in shambles for the last month or so leading up to this game. And so it's finally here. You kind of walk around campus, you see the pregame shows setting up, things like that. You go to the store, you see everyone wearing their Michigan State gear. So it seems like everyone is really going to tune into this one, and it's going to be fun to watch, I think.
It's so interesting because I don't think anyone in their wildest dreams, even the most optimistic Spartan fan, would have foreseen this year. So this was a team that started really off the radar. And so all of a sudden you have this hype that I think maybe internally you anticipated it, but probably not to this degree. How do you feel like the players in particular are handling all the hype that's surrounding this game?
Yeah, I think that's always a question when you do have a team that, was pretty bad last year and all of a sudden they're starting to win. So how do they handle it, right? And so I think with a coach like Mel Tucker, his whole thing is, neutral thinking. Don't dwell on the past. Don't get too in. They don't get too high after wins. They have that 24-hour rule where you get to celebrate and then you're on to the next game. So I think with what he's kind of instilled from the top on down, they've been able to kind of maintain that sort of neutral thinking mindset. And I think that's probably going to aid them well in a game like this.
He does seem to know what buttons to push, but this, of course, is his biggest challenge in terms of making sure he pushes the right ones this week. One thing that I find really interesting about this rivalry, and a lot of it is transfers, a lot of it guys who didn't necessarily grow up around this rivalry. So what have they done, to your knowledge, internally to get these new players who haven't experienced this before up to speed on just what it means?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a fair question when you're talking about a team that added 33 new scholarship players, between 18 freshmen and 15 transfers. Like, how are they kind of going to get involved in this rivalry when they really don't have much of a history with it? So I think one thing that they've done, safety Xavier Henderson was talking about this on Monday. Mel Tucker was kind of introducing them to the Paul Bunyan Trophy and the history surrounding that, and some of the controversy about Michigan State entering the Big Ten and maybe how Michigan didn't really want them in the Big Ten, things like that. I think that's what they're, and so I'm sure they've kind of noticed and picked up on things like that. But it really has been a point of emphasis, kind of get those new guys involved in this rivalry and make sure they know what.
Colton, you were talking about Mel Tucker there, and of course there have been so many rumors about his future and discussion of it this week. To what degree, if any, do you believe that's been a distraction?
Honestly, I don't think it has been much. Obviously, there's a lot of talk about that, and Michigan State had their bye week last year, so I think naturally you have some more time to discuss that. But he kind of came out Monday, said, "Hey, I'm focused on the school down the road. That's all we're thinking about right now." Players kind of said the same thing, that we're not even discussing that. It's not an option right now. We're just focused on beating Michigan, and that's really all you can say in a situation like that. And so based on what I heard, I didn't think it was too much of a distraction for the team. They do really seem focused on this game. Obviously, the LSU interest has been out there, and I think it makes sense when you consider the job that Mel Tucker's done. Like, he's gotten this team 7-0 after 2-5 start last year. You look at what he's done with the portal. You look at his recruiting mindset, kind of how he is a CEO of a program. That's what a lot of schools should be targeting. So it makes sense that there would be interest from maybe some other schools with head coach openings. But in terms of this week, it doesn't seem like it's much of a distraction for Michigan State or anyone around the program for that matter.
Peyton Thorne's been an amazing story to me, a guy who, when they brought in Anthony Russo, my sense was, man, this is probably going to be a real battle here. And I guess I kind of assumed that Anthony Russo would likely be the starting quarterback, but instead it has, of course, been Thorne, and not only has been the starter, but he's second in the Big Ten in passing efficiency. What has made him such a great fit for what they're doing?
Yeah, and first off, I mean, I would agree with you. Like going into this thing, I thought it was probably going to be Russo. When you bring in a grad transfer who has NFL aspirations and has played a lot of football over the years, I thought he was going to be the guy. But Peyton Thorne never backed down from this competition, and that's sort of wired in him. He's a coach's son. His father, Jeff Thorne, is a Division III coach who won the national championship a few years ago. So he's kind of always been around football. You can kind of see that when you talk to people around him, when you watch him work, watch his demeanor. He is the son of a coach in every single way. And so I think the reason why he's had so much success is I do think Anthony Russo, he really pushed Thorne to be the best player that he can be. And that's another one of the benefits of the transfer portal. Obviously you can add a guy like Kenneth Walker and he's going to get some Heisman, love and things like that. But also the players who aren't even starting, like it really raised the level of competition across the board and brought out the best in the guys that are starting now. And I think that was the case with Peyton Thorne. He has great chemistry with his receivers, Jaden Reed and Jalen Naylor. He's been excellent in play action, hitting the deep ball, those explosive plays that Michigan State's offense has been lacking over the years. And he's really not going to turn the ball over. He's I wouldn't even call him a game manager at this point because he can give you the big plays, but he's sort of the total package in terms of what he can give you on the field and making the right reads and not turning the ball over. So he's been one of the biggest success stories on this Michigan State team and one of the reasons why they're in the spot that they are.
What's the matchup you'll be watching the most closely, Colton?
For me, it's probably the offensive line, Michigan State's offensive line versus Michigan's defensive line. Because if you look at the games where the offense has played well for Michigan State, there's been that balance there. And I think, the offensive line has sort of dictated how the game's going. They're making holes for Kenneth Walker. They're kind of winning the physical battle up front. And the games where they've struggled against Nebraska and Indiana, that's been the opposite. Those teams have sort of dominated up front. Those running lanes weren't there for Kenneth Walker. And when that's not there, when the threat of him breaking off the big play is not there, it kind of seeps over into the passing game. The stuff that they like to do with play action kind of struggles. So then the offense, can become a mess at times. And in that Indiana game, they really needed a defensive score to actually come out on top in that one, pick 6 by Cal Halliday. So I think that's what people are kind of waiting for, like which offense is going to show up in this game. And if they do get the ones where they're hitting the big plays and there's balance and Kenneth Walker's doing his thing and, dapping up his teammates on 94-yard touchdown runs, it's going to be a good day. If not, we'll see what happens. So I think that's what people are kind of waiting for in this matchup.
Good stuff. Colton Pouncy from The Athletic. Thanks again. I know it's a busy week. Appreciate you taking a few minutes out for us.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Michigan and Michigan State Saturday in East Lansing. First time in the history of this rivalry that they have both entered the game at 7-0 or better. They are 2 of just 9 remaining unbeatens in college football, and one of them obviously will be bounced off this list this weekend. Angelique Chengelis does a great job of covering Michigan for the Detroit News. She joins us now. Angelique, it seems to me from where I sit that the pressure is squarely on Michigan this week. Is that your sense as well?
I think it's squarely on Michigan. It's squarely on Jim Harbaugh. I mean, this is an enormous game for him in his 7th year, coming into this season on the hot seat, taking that pay cut, slashing half his salary, getting the incentives, and then changing his staff the way he did. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many layers to this, Dave, but it's a huge game for Michigan football. It's a huge game for Harbaugh, for sure.
Is it your belief that in order to kind of placate the fan base, for lack of a better word, he needs to win this game and needs to beat Ohio State this year? Or is there some sort of margin for error there?
I think there's a little margin for error, but, this would mean a second loss to Mel Tucker, who is still, I mean, pretty young there at Michigan State. And, but I think that Michigan fans do value a win over Ohio State, one that they have not had and enjoyed for a long time. So I think that would cure a lot of ills if they do lose this game on Saturday. But, I think this is just a game that a lot of people have circled Michigan fans since last year, since getting blown out when they were, they were the big overdogs in that game.
Yeah.
And no, they didn't get blown out, but in a sense they did. The way that Michigan State team played under Mel Tucker in his first year, didn't have a spring ball, didn't really get that recruiting cycle because of the pandemic, and then they did what they did. So there's a lot riding on this. And if Michigan does lose, I think a win over Ohio State would help, but I mean, how likely is that, Dave? We've seen how that rivalry's gone.
Yeah, they're pretty good. Let me ask you this. It was interesting in talking to Colton a few moments ago. I'm not sure if you were able to hear that. We were discussing this idea that Michigan State has always seemed to take this rivalry more seriously than Michigan does. And we had Aiden Hutchinson on the show yesterday, and he's from the state of Michigan. Of course, he grew up around Michigan football and around this game. But I certainly didn't get the sense that he wasn't taking it seriously. To what extent do you believe that this game is being hammered into the psyche of the Michigan players in the same way that Ohio State is? And again, it's been reported there are countdown clocks to the Ohio State game in the facility. It is about beating Ohio State, but to what extent can it still be about beating Michigan State as well?
Well, you were at Big Ten Media Days, David, and I was sort of shocked, first of all, when Jim Harbaugh actually talked about the Ohio State rivalry, and he did mention that you have to beat your rivals, Michigan State, the other teams, and Ohio State. So not only was he finally talking about Ohio State, which he's really stayed away from in his previous 6 years, but then you went and talked to the players, and it was Josh Ross and Aiden Hutchinson, two Michigan-born players, and they both said, Michigan State is right there for them. And it may be because it's inherent to them, because they grew up here. They're friends on that team. But I do think that this has been, and I know it's not an inventing the wheel kind of approach, but they have taken a game by game approach this year, and they've really embraced this Michigan team. And I think that they have got the younger guys, the guys who aren't from Michigan, really focused on everything that is at stake in this game, and a large part of that being state bragging rights, because that is important to a guy like Aiden Hutchinson. It's very important to a guy like Josh Ross. And as we said, it's very important for Jim Harbaugh.
Let's take it on the field a little bit, and the improvement in this defense is staggering, frankly. I mean, they were 95th in the nation in scoring defense last year. They are second this year. Mike Macdonald has gotten a lot of credit for it, along with some of the new position coaches. What has made him such a good fit here, Angelique?
I think that we can't underestimate how much and undervalue how much the players have really enjoyed working with the younger staff. And maybe that sounds weird, but they do feel like there's a connection there. And here's Mike Macdonald, who had never coordinated a defense. And he's come in here with the ability to exchange ideas, not only with his assistant coaches, but also with these players. And that's something that the players have said has been really refreshing. And it's really been a lot of the defensive backs who've talked a lot about how that they're learning the game like they hadn't learned before. And maybe that's an indictment on the previous staff. I'm not sure. It sounds like it is a little bit. But it's this exchange that the players have an ownership in this defense, that they are allowed to suggest ideas. They see something on the field. Hey, Coach Macdonald, maybe it's this we should try. And he's willing to listen. So I think that there is a lot of that going on. And I think he's a really sharp guy. And that's all I'd heard about him when he was hired, is how smart he is. Yes, he had not coordinated a defense. Yes, he's very young, but he has all the tools. And he's certainly leaning on his assistant coaches. I mean, he's got Steve Klinkscale on the staff now. And that was another big add.
What about on the other side of the ball? And we were talking in the top of the show, Joshua and Jerry and I, about J.J. McCarthy and his role, and whether this is the game where you try to expand it a little bit. There are certainly Michigan fans who are calling for that, just kind of given his innate skill set. Where do you see them being in that process of integrating J.J. McCarthy into more facets of this offense?
I think they will, and I think they've done a good job sprinkling J.J. McCarthy into these games, getting his feet wet, getting him experience on the road in particular. and getting on the field at Nebraska in that night game, and it was so loud. And, but I'm not in that camp that I think a lot of people are like, a lot of people want him to start, want JJ McCarthy to start Saturday at Michigan State. And I think that would be a massive mistake. And I mean, how do you punish a guy, Cade McNamara, who has led this team to a 7-0 record, doesn't turn the ball over, had the one pick at Nebraska. He's done what they have asked him to do, and he's doing it without their leading receiver, without Ronnie Bell. That was a big loss for this offense and for Cade McNamara, who had a lot of chemistry with Ronnie Bell. And but I like the way that they're using JJ McCarthy. He does add a different element to the offense, a different wrinkle. He's supremely talented, and definitely they have. It appears to be a star in the making, right there, ready to go. But I just don't think it's time yet to expand those packages too much more.
Yeah, I'm with you on McNamara. I mean, the guy doesn't throw interceptions and doesn't take sacks. So he eliminates of those bad things that can happen in the pass game. He eliminates 2 of them essentially every time he drops back. And that's pretty good. That's a lot to ask for from a quarterback, and he does it. I want to leave you with this. What's the biggest thing in your mind that needs to happen for Michigan to win this game?
Well, I think that they have to hope that Aiden Hutchinson and David Ojabo can really get some pressure on Peyton Thorne. I think that's important. But to me, the matchup, I'm really interested to see how these Michigan defensive backs, how these corners handle the pressure, because they're going to be faced with something they have not seen this year, and that's the deep threat and a couple really good receivers and a quarterback who's very accurate, and they've got this quick strike ability that they haven't seen yet. And this team, to me, really has not had to face coming back in a game. So it's important for Michigan to start fast and to try to pressure Peyton Thorne as much as possible.
Can't wait to see how it comes out. Angelique, you're the best. Thanks so much. Great to see you. And
thank you, Dave.
Really appreciate the insights. Take care.